According to studies in 2019, over 20% of Americans suffer from mental illness. In the wake of COVID 19, these increased tremendously. Drug addiction, alcoholism, and suicide is at an all time high, and that's why I've set out on a mission to create awareness about the importance of mental health. I'm Janae Lopez, a pre doctoral clinical psychology student, and welcome to Mental Health Matters on Mental Health Mondays.
You okay?
Yes. I'm okay. Just never had a real Thanksgiving at the Tates before.
You didn't have a real one over here either, I guess.
You have a real nice family.
Thank you.
Got this for you for having me over today.
You got a gift for me. Is it money?
No.
That's a poem. Yeah, see it without my glasses. Why don't you read it for me?
No, I'd rather you read it, please.
Who will cry for the little boy, lost and all alone? Who will cry for the little boy, abandoned without his own? Who will cry for the little boy? He cried himself to sleep. Who will cry for the little boy who he never had for keeps?
Who will cry for the little boy who walked the burning sand? Who will cry for the little boy, the boy inside the man? Who will cry for the little boy who knew well hurt and pain? Who will cry for the little boy who died and died again? Who will cry for the little boy? A good boy he tried to be. Who will cry for the little boy who cries inside of me?
Who will cry for the little boy, Antoine?
I will. I always do.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mental Health Mondays with Janae. I have one of my favorites here today, and I'm so proud to finally introduce her as Dr. Jill Boutte. Hey!
Hello!
So Jill has her doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology at Xavier of Louisiana. She also has her master's degrees in social work, educational psychology, and clinical psychology. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she has worked in social work for 7 years. Her specialties are infant mental health and trauma, and she has extensive experience working with young children, adolescents, and their families.
Yes.
So, without further ado, welcome. So happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Of course. So just as I tell everybody, this is a candid conversation. You're allowed to be as vulnerable as you want. This is a conversation about your journey and how you arrived, who you are, and what it means to be a clinical psychologist and a woman of color, specifically in the crises that we are facing today amongst our children and adolescents. I titled this one Childhood Trauma, the First Pandemic. So I think it speaks volumes to what a lot of kids are experiencing and what is going seen and unseen. So I'm excited to kind of delve into this today. But before we get into all of the details, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, other than the stuff that I mentioned already?
Yeah, all the boring educational stuff you mentioned. So I'm Jill, Dr. Boutte, I guess now, which is
right.
Weird to even say, but so born and raised and still reside in New Orleans. Very proud of that. New Orleanian at heart. Basically, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist in high school. I had one of those psychology electives from one of the track and PE coaches. Like, it was just completely random class that I took. And I fell in love with it right then and there. I was like, I want to be a psychologist. How do I do this? How do I figure this stuff out for the rest of my life? So I always just kind of wondered why people do what they do and why do they think what they think. I remember watching TV in high school and even earlier, like in childhood, and thinking like, why did that person do that? Or they're going to jail for this. What happened? And it always went back to something in childhood, always. So I kind of figured out that I wanted to work with children and families then too, because I mean, if these people got help when they were kids, then maybe they wouldn't be on the news now with, you know, whatever big event happening. So that's kind of where this came from and started, and how I got, you know, to this career. Yeah, and I think just personally, like I said, New Orleans girl, I like to go to Disney. You can see Mickey back here.
Of course, Mickey was going to make an appearance, you guys.
Of course, Mickey is everywhere in here. It's almost like find the hidden Mickeys, where is he? But yeah, I just like spending time with my friends and family. Anything with water. I love my TV shows, as Janae knows. Yeah, and just self-care practices. I like baths, I like naps, I like reading and just unplugging for a bit. So that's kind of me in a 2-minute nutshell.
Right. I mean, there's so much more that we could probably explore about Jill and some of her life experiences. I will tell you, Jill was my first friend at orientation for our doctoral program. And I feel like we have been through the ringer in this 6-year journey. So
yeah, we have.
So it's so nice to be on this side of things and being able to really talk about your passions and kind of what got you to walking in your purpose and doing what you really wanted to do. So yeah, that's very exciting. So just for fun, right?
For fun. I like fun.
What's on your playlist? What gets you motivated?
Oh man, I'm so random. I like all the genres. So literally riding in the car with me is just a surprise. You don't know what you're going to get. You're going to get R&B. You're going to get reggae. You're going to get pop. You're going to get rap. You're going to get some random, I'm talking like NSYNC to Marvin Gaye to Selena to Bob Marley. And recently I found some CDs from high school. So I usually am, but I'm pretty much stuck in the early 2000s and the 90s. So yes, you're going to find a lot of things on my playlist.
Got it. And by the way, one of her favorite people is Aaron Neville. Just so
yes, shout out to Aaron Neville. Absolutely. How could I not even mention him? But yes, he's absolutely on all my playlists as well.
Yes. So kind of going into like your professional experiences, because you were a social worker before you became a clinical psychologist. So from those experiences, what do you think has been the most rewarding moment so far?
I think the most rewarding moment, and you know, whenever I say any of these things, I don't mean to sound corny or cheesy at all whatsoever, but it fits with today's topic. I think with working with kids and families who have experienced trauma, when they either decide to start their journey of healing or when you see it happening. And that's when I feel like, whew, okay, I did something good here. I'm helping this family out. So, I mean, and that's sometimes they don't show up anymore. This isn't the time for therapy or something happens. But the most rewarding moments is when you get to see this child or this family come in a really bad place. And then by the time, you know, over time through therapy and healing, they're in a very different place. And that's just, it's amazing. It's beautiful to see.
Definitely understand those moments, especially when it finally clicks for the parents, right? Or the caregivers. You know, it's like the child has been working really hard in therapy and in their treatment and stuff. But then it's like you bring the parents in and they're like, I finally see it working. Oh my God, thank you. You know, like that moment, I get it. Definitely.
Yeah, a lot of people think, oh, you work with kids, you don't work with adults. False.
Right.
Has some form of caregiver. So yeah, that is important, because it's not just working with the kid, especially when we're talking about younger children. You have to work with the family.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a very beautiful moment, like you said, when the parents are seeing change, and also when they're, accepting and kind of seeing what happened through their child's lens. As it could
Mm-hmm.
be, it could hurt. It's sad stuff that we're talking about
It
with trauma,
does.
but that is rewarding when you see those aha moments click for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Definitely agree. Well, while we're talking about some falsities, right, I want to get into this segment to kind of uncover some common myths and facts that some
So
people
many,
hold about childhood trauma,
so many.
which, yeah, which I've only highlighted a few. Trust me, there are plenty. And as Jill and I were talking kind of before we actually started recording, we could probably do a whole segment on just myths and facts in
Yeah.
itself.
Oh
So,
yeah.
but let's start with the first one. Child abuse is rare. Myth or fact?
Myth, myth. 5 children, I want to say it's like 5 children die every day from child abuse, which is terrible.
Mhm.
And the highest rate of child abuse happens in children under 1. So we're talking infants. So the stats on child abuse, it's unfortunately really high and it's climbing. So that is absolutely a myth.
And just adding to that, I think something else that needs to be understood is oftentimes when it comes to children and abuse, there is very little evidence to substantiate the crime. So oftentimes the victimizer goes unpunished,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
the child is left to carry this burden and
Mhm.
history of abuse.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, that's the rough part. So here's another one. It is only abuse if it is violent. Myth or fact?
Myth. There's neglect, there's sexual abuse, there's emotional or psychological maltreatment. I mean, sure, children, I think like 45% or something like that die from physical abuse, which is violent. But I think the highest rate of abuse is with neglect, and that does not have to be violent at all. That's actually most likely the opposite of violent. So, no, that's a myth. Myth. Another big one too is children who are abused usually have or there's a high rate of parents who have substance abuse problems. So it
Mm,
doesn't mean violence. It can just mean that mom or dad or caregivers having problem with substances.
mhm.
So myth.
Which is something also big to kind of highlight, and why we kind of highlight this notion of just because I'm working with the children doesn't mean that the family is not involved, because
Yeah,
oftentimes you're treating the whole system, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So,
And I mean, I'll probably touch on this later, but with little bitties that I call little bitties, like 0 to 3, 0 to 6, you have to repair that attachment some way if it's safe and appropriate to do so. And that's absolutely with that. It may be that you're in therapy, that child's in therapy with that adult who
mhm,
was the abuser or who, kind of was involved in the trauma. So definitely working with adults, with parents and caregivers, as well as the child.
yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, the next one. Children usually tell someone about their abuse. Myth or fact?
Myth. This is a hard one too, because, well, one, I think only like 10% of kids actually tell.
Mhm,
And this is a hard pill for adults, parents, teachers, anyone to swallow, because they just don't understand. Like, we have a good relationship. Why won't my child tell me? Or I
mhm,
talked to them about safety. I thought they would tell me. And, I mean, and some parents, and they go through traumatic events as well. The family goes through traumatic events, right? Not just the
mhm.
child. And so they may
Absolutely.
feel big feelings about their child not telling them, but this is absolutely a myth. Kids usually feel guilty, or they may have been told to keep the trauma a secret, or they may feel scared.
Mm,
They may not know how or who to tell, or they may think someone may not believe them. So it's hard. It's a hard process to disclose abuse. And yeah, that is a myth. I wish that more people kind of understood and knew that.
And I think the other piece that some people need to understand is like children are often silenced through threats of fear or like how you mentioned before, of not being believed, or even not even having the language skills, right, to be able to express what was actually happening to them in the
Right.
first place.
Yeah.
So oftentimes it's like, well, why didn't you just tell me what was happening? And literally, they don't have the language capacity to do
Right.
it in the first place. So,
Right. Especially young children,
yes.
right? I mean, they literally, like you said, they don't have the language, they don't have the words. They may have been manipulated or groomed to think that what was happening was okay, or that if you tell, they're not going to believe you. So
Mhm.
what's the point in telling? And also, I've seen a lot of kids that don't do it out of love, and that might seem strange, but meaning,
Mm.
well, I love my mom and I don't want to hurt her feelings. And I know she loves her boyfriend, but he did this to me. So it's very complicated. Like I said, it's a hard process. And it's not just one event. Disclosure takes a while. It's a
Yes.
process. So yeah, it's hard, but that is definitely a myth. Children do not usually tell about their abuse.
Mhm. Okay, and last one. Um, Children get over bad experiences in childhood. Myth or fact?
Did you see me kind of twitch a little bit when you said
Oh, I know. I took
yeah,
a deep breath before I even
yeah,
got there because
yeah.
I'm
That,
like,
whew. Um, absolutely a myth. Absolutely a myth. Bad things that happen, and this is kind of how I explain it to, children and families. It doesn't go away, and it certainly doesn't go away on its own.
Mhm.
You know, um, and I think I'll touch on this later too. Just because a child may be young, and a lot of people assume that children don't remember, but that does not mean that it didn't happen and that it does not follow them,
Mm.
right? Um, and if you look at just what happens in adulthood, I mean, you see more criminal activity, you see more people in jail who have been abused or have been through, traumatic experiences. But the abuse, the trauma may be brief, but it lasts a lifetime. And that just means that it can follow you. But with healing and recovery and treatment, that doesn't have to be the case where it's something that, just is affecting you in the same way as when the trauma happened throughout your life.
Mhm. Mhm. That makes a lot of sense, and I think, like, stemming from that, I think it's going to be important for people to kind of understand exactly what is childhood trauma, because from these myths and kind of facts that maybe people hold or subscribe to, they often just think of the worst case scenario. Well, it was the abuse and he was beat and or this and stuff like that. But I think there are other aspects that are included in childhood trauma that people don't often readily recognize as childhood trauma. So,
Oh, yeah.
in your own words and in your experience, can you tell us what is childhood trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of parents have said, well, I didn't think that that was that bad, or it's not like somebody was beating him, or, like you said, extreme, right?
Hmm.
But when we think of trauma, we have to also think of stress, right? So basically, childhood trauma is when a child is either in a situation where they feared for their lives, or they thought they would be injured, or they perceived a threat to their safety. So this can be things like big things, right? Witnessing violence, whether it's family violence, domestic violence, community violence. It can be someone that they love dying. It can be a car accident. It can be, even in little ones, a really loud noise that happens that turns
Mm-hmm.
into something else for them. So it's not necessarily the big abuse things that we often think of. It can be the smallest thing. So when we think about stress, though, everybody has stress, right? But that severe stress, it's all about when that happens, how that person perceives it, how that child perceives that stress. If it's overwhelming and it's a threat to their safety, then that's when you get into more of the childhood trauma, the PTSD, the traumatic kind of disorders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. And I think some of the things that I've also just been highlighting leading up to, the release of this kind of conversation between the two of us is kind of highlighting some of those childhood traumas, and like highlighting what you were talking about, like that stress. And oftentimes they categorize it as like toxic stress, right? And so
Mhm.
it's like that persistent and that consistent like engagement or witnessing of something that causes stress to the
Mhm.
body, right?
Right.
To the point where kids fear for their life, or they feel threatened, or
Mhm.
even if they fear for mommy's life,
Right.
or so yeah, so some of it can be kind of projected upon them,
Mhm.
or be done vicariously, basically.
Right. Right. You don't
Um,
have to necessarily experience the event. You can even hear that the event happened, and that can
yes,
cause these symptoms of, stress and traumatic stress. So
yeah.
yeah.
And this is probably something we can touch on probably at another time,
Mhm.
but I think especially like when I get to the point where I want to talk about postpartum and
Mhm.
pregnancy, and mental health effects of that. But
Yeah.
I go often back to some of the conversations I have when I think of a lot of women who were pregnant, during Hurricane Katrina, and that
Woo.
in vitro stress that
Yeah.
was on them, that was then
On
consumed
the
by
baby.
then the baby.
Yes.
And now we're seeing that play out in some of these kids who are in high school or
Absolutely.
now entering college, right? And we're now seeing those things where, well, no, that wasn't trauma to them. They weren't even born yet. Well,
Absolutely, it was, absolutely. You mentioned my as working as a social worker, what was
yeah.
something I saw after Katrina. So I think these kids were about 8, 9 years old whenever it rained. I'm talking, they weren't going to school. They weren't going
Hmm.
outside.
Hmm.
They were inside under a cover or even by the window. I mean, that was huge. And some parents would not really make the connection until I said, tell me a little bit about your Katrina story. Oh, well, we were XYZ. And then it kind of make that aha moment, right? Where they're like, this is why they don't like the rain or
Yeah.
changes in weather, Personally, when they start saying hurricane stuff on the news, I clock out a little bit. For me, that brings me back, right? So
Yeah.
it's things that people don't often think of as traumatic. It's absolutely can be traumatic, especially for a child.
Hmm. So when we talk about like these traumas that a lot of infants, children, and adolescents go through, what do we look for, right? Like, what are those symptoms?
Yeah.
Like you were just highlighting the fact that, well, when it starts raining outside, this child is hiding under cover. Like that's a traumatic response,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
to the lay people who may not know that child's story, they may just think, oh, he might be scared of the lightning and the thundering or something. And it's so
Sad,
much more than that.
or he's bad because he doesn't want to go to school, and
Yeah,
I
he's
think we'll
being
touch on
defiant.
that, yeah, later, but it's really important to try to think about these behaviors through a trauma lens. Like, is this child scared of lightning, or is this something relating back to Katrina that was
Mhm,
traumatic for the child? So
mhm,
yeah, but things to look for if we're thinking, because infant mental health is my passion. So I'm going to start with these children under 2. Okay. So
okay.
this is probably the most difficult because they cannot verbally tell you their emotion,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
So that's one thing that people are like, infant mental health, how do they talk to you? So
hmm,
what you look for is usually kids who have experienced trauma before the age of 2, they have problems regulating their emotions and their behavior. So you might
mm,
see or screaming, crying excessively when nothing is medically wrong. You're starting to look for those kind of behaviors of fear or just what is going on here. And some people say he was always in a bad mood. He was
mm,
born angry.
hmm,
You know,
mhm,
kids aren't born angry, so it's kind of looking for those behaviors and emotions and just where are they on a scale, like just being aware of that. When we re-experience things through trauma, when we're re-experiencing those traumatic events in little kids, that looks different than it would for adults. So you see nightmares, you see them becoming fearful of new things, kind of
mm,
out of nowhere. And then you especially want to watch for their behavior and their play. kids communicate through play. That's how they talk to us, right? So if most of the time what happens is their play will reenact the traumatic event. So you may have, and I've seen this where kids have, every time they play like clockwork, they have a mommy doll and a daddy doll, and they fight and they fight and they fight and they fight. And what happened was the child witnessed mom and domestic violence, right? Mom and dad fighting. So kind of looking for themes in play. We ask that question a lot. Like, what does their play look like? What are they playing about? What does that look like? So that's something to look for sure. Yeah, and just if kids are more aggressive or impulsive, if they're having problems with those developmental things, eating, sleeping, digestive problems, verbal skills, memory problems. Another big kind of thing to look for is regression. So a lot of times kids will regress in their functioning. So let's say they were fully potty trained and then something happened, and then all of a sudden they cannot use the potty by themselves anymore. So those are things in really young kids to kind of look for. I'd say the play for sure, their emotions, their behavior, and regression in skills. 3 to 6-ish kind of, older kids there, maybe school age kids. It's all those same things, but you're going to see more problems coming out in school. I know we'll talk about school for a bit, but focusing, learning disabilities start to happen in school age kids. They may act out, again, problems regulating their emotions and behavior, right? They may imitate what they've seen, let's say it was abuse, or they may begin bullying or being abusive themselves. A lot of times moms will say, or a child and mom will come in and he's completely cursing the mom out or saying, does he always talk to you like that? Like, what is that about? And, some moms can say, well, he heard that from, whoever was verbally abusive to mom. So that's how they kind of reenact things. They'll have problems trusting or making friends most of the time. Self-confidence is usually really low, and they may have those somatic symptoms. So complaints of headaches, stomach aches, being really tired. So those are kind of the things to look for in that school age, and 3 and up, pretty much. With teens and older kids, kind of all of the same apply. Except here you start to see more anxiety, depression, like kind of the things that we know more about and can recognize. Attention problems, academic problems, problems with friends or, relationships. And you'll see more drug and alcohol use in teens. Not all the time, but that is kind of what distinguishes the trauma in teens and in children. Unhealthy sexual activity or like just really risky behavior that they often say, what would make them do that? Or why are you doing that? That's dangerous. Those are some things to kind of look for in that older population.
And I think like as you were highlighting like some of these symptoms and how to look at it for different categories, right? In development of childhood, like something that came to mind was it's like those somatic symptoms.
Oh yeah.
I think are very, very, very important because I think oftentimes parents will write it off as, well, he just doesn't want to go to school, or he just doesn't want to listen, or he's pretending. Nothing's really wrong with him. And so medically, he may not have something actually wrong,
right?
But the trauma is manifesting itself in that way. And so I think it deserves a second look, right, into what, if your child is consistently or has a pattern of, well, every time he gets around this time of the year, he or she starts complaining about headaches or stomach aches or something's always wrong, right? So
yeah. And, it's like they say, there's a book, The Body Keeps the Score. So
my favorite.
Right? It's a very good book. Your body, and this happens with children too, when people are like, how do they not remember? Your body will remember the trauma, but it's going to come out in different ways, right? And so just like you said, people may have no clue why my stomach, it hurts every, Monday, or every time around Mardi Gras, I get bad headache. Like that, those are all things. It's important. That's one thing that we ask parents about too when we're assessing. Is this any kind of significant time of year? Is it a birthday to someone? Did the abuse happen or the trauma happen around a holiday? You know, it's really important to kind of notice those things because children will somatically show a lot of symptoms.
Yeah. And I think, which is something we're also going to get to a little later, is like, you know, how these things kind of transition into adulthood. But like, I get it because, like, me personally, as someone who suffers with anxiety sometimes, like, I already know when it's happening because my body tells me first. And I was like, oh,
Oh
here we go, you know? So it just as it is for me as an adult, imagine what that's like for a kid who has no
yeah.
label to put to it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I think
And
like got to give our kids a little bit more grace,
absolutely.
you know, into understanding what they may be experiencing as truth or
Yeah.
that it holds value. So yeah.
Yeah, and you know, kids have their cause and effect skills aren't perfected yet, right? When you're a young kid. And so I'll share, I have unfortunately a good number of friends who have passed away. And I'll just feel different on those days, right? I may not be able to place her. I'm like, I'm in a bad mood today. What is going on? And then I remember, oh, it's, you know, August 11th. My friend passed away on this day several years ago. My body remembers that, but I may not even be aware of what the date is, you know?
Yep.
And so kids have a hard time. Like you said, we can do that now. Like, oh,
And
okay,
it's
that's
even difficult for us to do it now because sometimes I walk around, I'm just like, what is going on?
no, I would walk around the whole day and then be like,
Yeah.
oh, I get it. The anniversary of that is tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, this month is kind of for me. Cause, you know, so yeah, I mean, just thinking definitely, like you said, give kids more grace. It's hard. It's hard on adults. It's even harder on kids.
As we know about like symptoms, and we've kind of went through what to look for, especially at different stages of development with children. What do you think are the direct and indirect impacts of childhood trauma?
Yeah. So I think when we look at brain development, right, especially in early childhood, that is such an important time for kids because their brains aren't fully developed yet, right? So early childhood trauma, that's been associated with kind of a reduced brain cortex, which is
Mhm.
responsible for all the functions like memory, attention, thinking, language, perceptual awareness, things like that. So trauma can literally change or affect your IQ. And I mentioned this already, your ability to regulate your emotions. And that all comes from our brain. So trauma literally changes your brain.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And then with older kids, it's all those same things. But like I said, we see more of those unsafe or risky behaviors come out. So smoking, eating disorders, substance use, high risk activities. So that all, the ability to kind of regulate that is happening in your brain. But once you experience trauma, that all changes. It's like those neurons and synapses are not going where they should.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So as far as brain development, again, it can absolutely change brain development.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and I think we also see changes with thinking about kids and relationships.
Mm,
Um,
that's a big
friendships. Yeah, yeah. Friendships can look really different with people, not kids, adults, anybody who have experienced trauma, right? But with kids, they may start to bully. They may be aggressive in school, and kids don't want to be their friends. When really this child is just responding to trauma. They don't want to be a bully. They don't want to be me. They want friends, you know? Um, or you may have some kids who have experienced trauma that are on the other spectrum of that. They are shy, depressed, avoidant. And so they may be, you know, the kid that's in the corner not engaging. So friendships can definitely be affected when kids have experienced trauma. I think also what's big, especially in the infant mental health world, is the attachment to that caregiver. When
Mm.
you experience trauma, you know, that secure attachment, which is that bond that you form to have a sense of safety and security. When children have gone through trauma in early childhood, that secure attachment can get messed up. The
Mm.
secure attachment, though, is basically your foundation for how you understand yourself, the world, others, how you interact with people. So we really look at the relationship with the parent and the attachment. Well, how are you guys getting along now? Or how was it before the trauma happened? And really work, hopefully in early childhood and in early intervention, try to get that attachment back on track.
And then for our educators, and even for our parents too, right, who have children going into school, definitely highlighting this as our back to school special. So I think it's kind of important to know, like, what are the implications on like academic learning or being in the actual physical classroom? A lot of our kids now are coming off of virtual learning. This is going to be the first time that they are now entering into a school building in over a year.
Yeah.
So what can that look like? Because I'll tell you, the pandemic, like I said, childhood trauma, the first pandemic, COVID, the second pandemic, and now these children are going through that traumatic experience.
Yeah. And that's another topic that could be a whole segment in and of itself.
Yep.
Trauma in the classroom. My goodness, that is so important. And yeah. Okay. So what it looks like basically, before I can talk about this for a long time. Some of these kids who have experienced trauma, they may not be able to express how they're feeling. So you're not going to get a kid that's saying, hey, Miss So-and-so, I'm being triggered right now, so I need to take a breather. You're not going to get that. So they may have problems like forming relationships we just talked about with other kids, but with teachers, they may not trust adults, and the adults who they were, like supposed to trust and feel safe with or, rely on may have not done those things, so you're thinking I'm your teacher, I'm the safe person, but they may not see it that way at all. So that's something that sometimes happens. Again, poor self-regulation, right? They have big emotions, big behaviors. They don't know what to do with that. So what that looks like is the bad kid, right? The kid that is jumping up and down, disobeying the rules, and then that often leads to other problems in school. But yeah, we may see, just disruptive behavior, inattentive behavior, and just problems with those emotions. Kids who are just exploding, most of the times we can find a traumatic event that happened in that child's life. Also, just like that negative thinking, some kids may have low self-esteem when it comes to learning and, oh, I can't do it. Or like, I remember when I was little, I was like the 9 multiplication tables. I was like, please no, this is literally giving me anxiety. Like, I can't do this. But it's different when you have negative thinking because of trauma, right? So they're literally maybe thinking, I'm a bad kid. Why did I get in school? I'm a bad kid. I'm not gonna have a future. I'm not gonna learn anything. This teacher doesn't care about me. The negative thinking is and it's rooted so deep sometimes that it's hard to change that easily. So the kids may also view things very differently. So let's say that a teacher's like, hey, Janae, sit down in your seat. If you are a child who has been traumatized or experienced trauma, you may hear that as, Janae, sit down. That's not what the teacher said, right? But
Absolutely.
This thinking that they have, they are literally hearing it like that. So, and who knows, that could have been how they were talked to as other adults that they're supposed to trust, or that just could be that negative thinking. So that child may act out quickly in an angry way when you're like, I just asked him to sit down. I was polite. So that's another thing that we see in schools, just how that negative thinking comes out. And unfortunately, kids are getting punished for all these things, right? Because teachers don't know what to look for with trauma, or it's not a trauma-informed school, which is so important. Also another segment by itself. But
right. I think we're just coming up with like, we could talk about
that. I know. I seriously have part 50 going on with this. But yeah, a lot of the times, basically what we're seeing is almost every child that I've worked with who has experienced trauma has come with, oh, and at school. And when I meet with the teachers, or, in some agencies where I've worked, it was a great opportunity to work with teachers and other providers.
Yep.
I would sit down and say, okay, with the parents' permission, like, this child has experienced some things and this is what this looks like. So when you're seeing them completely blank out, they could be disassociating. Not that they're not listening to you or they're ignoring you, it's just a lot of things. I really wish that trauma was talked about more in trainings and like professional developments with teachers. I'm sure it is now, but it's so important.
I think it's getting better.
Yeah,
But I think it's taking the integration of more contracted licensed clinical psychologists or school psychologists who are actually on ground and able to dedicate that time and effort into that one school.
right.
Unfortunately, so many of us are limited, right, in
Mhm,
what we can
mhm.
do or the time that we can give to a
Yeah.
lot of these schools or what the schools can afford,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh
Because
yeah.
I mean, everything is not always about money. However, it takes a lot of time, it takes
Mhm,
a lot of effort, and it
mhm.
places a big strain on who you are as a professional when you're managing a group of kids who've experienced trauma. It's a
Right.
lot. A lot goes into it.
Yeah.
A lot is required of you, and a lot of it is required of the administration team. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, not everyone is willing to put in that much work.
Right. Right.
So
It's hard. I mean, especially when you think about community violence and depending on where that school is and a specific neighborhood or
absolutely.
community, you may have a whole classroom of children who have experienced some form of traumatic event. That is, I always say I feel for these teachers. I
Me
mean, it's
too.
hard. It is hard. I think the biggest thing though is really just kind of thinking of it, like I said, through a trauma lens and
Hmm.
giving that child support. That child may not need punishment in that moment, or they may not, you know, need negative attention. Maybe they need more positive attention. And also, one thing I really want to just say is that one of my worries and kind of in the field when the pandemic started
Hmm.
was who is going to report all this child abuse? Teachers report so much, kids mainly report in the school setting. So
Well,
that
majority of their time is spent in school.
yeah, yeah. So, teachers definitely play an important role with getting these kids safe. Children are reporting at school. And so that was definitely on my mind when the pandemic happened. I was like, who are these kids going to tell? Especially
Yeah.
if it's happening at home. That was big. That was something to consider. So,
Yeah, definitely something I considered as well because it's like now you've kind of taken away the very thing that provided them safe and comfort.
right.
And while this is a public health issue and it was done out of best interest of our
Mhm,
society, right?
mhm.
When we think about those kids who have experienced and are still experiencing trauma, especially within the homes, you are now placing them in an environment where they can't escape from. And
Yes.
so then I think, which I think also may be something to note for parents and even for teachers and educators and administration staff, because who knows, the child may have formed a relationship with the secretary or the janitor or the
Yeah.
school lunch lady, right?
Anybody. Yeah.
So I think it's going to be I think we are going to have to pay attention, right, to this increase in behavior that's going to
Yeah.
happen because
Oh, yeah.
they've had no outlet all of this
Right.
time. And
Right.
now they're finally in a space where they can let it out because
Mhm.
they do feel somewhat safe or at least safer than where they were.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's something we may see as kids transition back into in-person learning,
Yeah.
is an increase in a lot of these behaviors.
Absolutely. The behaviors, and I think that the like amount of reports for child abuse is going to go up while these kids are in
Yeah,
person too.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just school is like you said, kids spend all their time there. It is very important. I wish all schools could have a trauma informed approach but I mean, if you're a teacher out there, these are just like some things to kind of look for. And just thinking, some people are like this kid's just bad. No kids are
Yeah,
just bad or they're doing this for this reason. Just try to think of it a different way. Maybe what has this child potentially been through that's
right.
causing them to act like this instead of this child wants to wreck my classroom.
Right.
It could be that they've been through some hard things and this is just how we're seeing it.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think as big of a role as teachers play, parents, please advocate for your child and please advocate for other children in the classroom, right? Because sometimes teachers will listen, perhaps maybe to another parent.
Mhm.
If they're not seeing it, like, maybe you can be that voice in saying to the teacher, well, have you considered this,
Right.
perhaps? Or, maybe it's this. So please, please, please advocate for your children
Absolutely.
and their peers, basically.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah. So with that being said, what has your experience taught you in identifying and treating childhood trauma? What does
Lord.
that reality look like? Let's take away the textbooks. Let's take away the
Yeah,
hardcore research and data, which, by
yeah.
the way, we do go to, right? We do go to the
Absolutely.
data and the
Oh,
numbers
yeah.
oftentimes to kind of get our point across, right? Or get
Oh,
someone
yeah.
to listen. However, the reality of what things look like in a therapy room or a classroom looks
Woo.
very different than what the textbook says. So,
Absolutely. Man, again, this could be a whole
but that's
segment.
a big question, right?
It's so much. People often ask me, like, what's wrong with you? Why do you sit here and listen to these horrible, terrible, traumatic stories all day? And I'm like, I don't know. No, I'm just joking. I don't say I don't know. It is hard. It is hard work. I think some of the biggest kind of things that I've learned, what one person may view as traumatic may be an absolute norm for someone else.
Mm,
Um, you
mhm,
know, and I had a case once where there was just a lot of incest, for example.
mhm,
And we're all, running around like, let's put out the fire. These children are not safe. This is so traumatic. But to that family where this was happening every day for years,
mm,
that was their norm. And I had to kind of sit back with that and just think, like, one, that's horrible that incest would be a norm to someone. But two, that's so right. We all are different people with different experiences. It's not saying it's okay. It's not saying it's not defined as trauma, but you have to look at it different when you think that way, and that takes a
mhm,
lot of education to work around changing how that family or that child views that.
mm,
Um, or, example, domestic violence. If that's all you've ever seen, then you have no clue what a healthy relationship looks like, or how
yep,
parents are supposed to get along, or that you're not supposed to hit your friend on the playground, even though you love them. So that was big for me when I kind of had that aha moment of, oh, wait a minute, Jill, with your degrees coming into this child's life, this isn't the norm for you, but it has been for them, and it's your job to help them see that that's not healthy, that's not normal. So that was big.
mm.
Definitely
Huge, I'm sure.
huge, huge. And I think too, I mentioned this already. Trauma affects everybody: parents, family, siblings, friends, teachers. It's not just the child that it affects, it's everybody. um and I think with treatment, it's not linear. We
Mm,
learn when we're in school and we're learning about trauma treatment, and you do this first, and then
mm,
you move
mm,
into this
mm, mm.
phase, and then you move into this phase, and ta-da, all is well. Nope. Sometimes, sure. Other times, and I think back specifically to a teenage girl I was working with, we start off with psychoeducation. So you're going to learn everything about what is trauma, the kind of trauma you experience, what happened to you. We even go through things like statistics, any questions you have on the table. Another reason why I love trauma therapy, it is blunt. We don't use, you know, cute words for things. We are using anatomical,
Language, yes, we're gonna call
because
it what
this
it is.
happened, right? This happened to this child. So we're not going to say the thing that happened to you. No, we're going to say the domestic violence, or when, when that Katrina came and took your, we're talking in terms that it happened. We can't sugarcoat it, right? Um, so we were going through psychoeducation at first, and then we're almost to the end. We had one more session left. She was doing amazing. And she asked something like, how many kids get abused? And is it their fault? And my face dropped a little. I was like, oh,
Wow.
wow, wait a minute. We did that. I don't even know how many weeks ago. when you were first learning about trauma. So it's not linear. It's not just, it can't always go in order, you know. Yeah, that was big for me too, because I was like, did I not do a good job explaining that? And they're at a point where they've, you know, healed and did so much work, but that just shows you how trauma can affect you. And you know, you may think you're okay and you're not, and that's okay to not be okay. Something big happened to you. So I think too, on a more positive note, because it is hard, you know, you're talking about a lot of negative things that have happened. Kids are amazing. They're just responding to something that happened to them. It is never their fault. They are children. It should have never happened to them. You know, I think a lot of people, like I said, they say, well, something's wrong with him. Fix him. Something is up with him. It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with this child. Something happened to this child. So
I
I
always
think,
ask, I'm like, fix him how? Like, how would you like me to
you
do
know,
that? How would you like me to do that? Because,
right,
you know,
right.
this is not like a car where I can
No,
identify the problem, put the part, and bam, it runs great now. Like,
no. And even with therapy, you know, you may have, hopefully, as soon as the trauma happens, early intervention is so important. That's my other kind of like, you know, I can go off on that. But you may have therapy when you're, I don't know, let's say 3, 5, 7. Some things may come up again as you change in age developmentally. You know, your trauma treatment that you had at 3 or 5, well, at 7 or maybe like 10, 12, you're in a different, you know, phase of life. You may need to go back to therapy, process some things, learn some different coping skills. So I think that's something else too. I've seen kids who I'm like, they need trauma therapy and they're not ready. And that's okay. That's okay. They're not ready yet, put it that way, you know? So yeah, it's been, it's hard work, but it is very rewarding, and it's a lot, but I'm just happy to help, you know, in any way that I can with these kids.
And, you know, honestly, I kind of admire you for your
Thanks.
commitment, right, to healing and being part of the healing process for children who have undergone trauma. For those of you who don't know, you know, children are kind of like my little heart in the midst of everything else that I do and stuff like that. So I definitely have a soft spot for kids. And yeah, it's definitely a rewarding experience, especially when they get so excited to see you because they know they're going to work with you today, right? That's like the best feeling ever. So for you parents out there who always talk about how it's just that smile that just makes my day sometimes, you know, for us people who don't have kids, we kind of get it based upon the kids that we work with.
Oh yeah. I refer to them as my babies. Like,
yeah, they are. They become a part of your life.
You know? Absolutely. And you know, I mean, these kids that I've worked with in these families, to this day, I think about them, right? Yeah. Like they don't leave, right? And you don't forget them. And I think it changes you. I mean, in a good way. Like each experience, I feel like I've learned so much from these kids and families that has helped me become a better clinician, or, you know, help the way that I view things. So, you know, as much as therapy and we're here to help, I think families should also recognize that you guys are helping us too. And, you know, absolutely important. Yeah.
Absolutely. So for all you people out there who think that we have people that come into our office and lay on a couch, no, it doesn't happen that way. Okay.
Some kids like to relax sometimes. They'll lay down.
Yeah, you know, there's sometimes I didn't did that. I mean, under the table, you know, it happens. But
yeah, I think that's another question that I get all the time too. Like, how do you even, what do you do? Like, what is trauma therapy?
Right?
You know, and because people come in, they're like, this happened to them, but that's when you get to fix it. I don't know what to do, you know, like here. But I mean, it's all about like enhancing safety. Like I said, that psychoeducation piece, changing those negative thoughts, learning how to regulate your emotions and your behavior, and then being ready to have the capacity to cope, right? Because like we said in the beginning, it's a myth. This does not go away.
Right.
You have to learn how to cope with when you're triggered, when you have a reminder, or when, you know, it's just coming up for you again in your life. And so that's basically, that is a very small nutshell what happens in trauma therapy.
Yeah.
Child is able to learn how to either discuss the events that happen or without feeling completely overwhelmed, you know. Yeah, and I promise you, for all therapists out there who work with kids and in trauma, I'm sure they would agree it is a very beautiful thing to see. You have a child come in that will not say the word, they won't tell you what happened, they just stare at you for an hour. And then at the end, you know, most of the time, you have someone who is able to verbally say what happened to them, how they felt, what they did, how they feel now about it, looking back, how they feel and what they, you know, do now and what they think about it. And it's, I cry every time I hear a child's narrative or their story at the end of therapy. It's just, it's beautiful. And that's how, you know, besides the research and everything else, like you said, that's how I know that this works. And that's how I know that kids need this help.
I definitely agree, and I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think, you know, children being able to get to that point where they can actually say it out loud, right? Like what their experience was is a big feat in and of itself. And I think a lot of times we need to be patient, be mindful, right, of what their experiences is, and understand that sometimes this is the first time somebody has probably even asked them, "Are you okay? Well, what happened?" Right? Or, you know, like, what has kind of shaped you into this person, right? And that goes not just for children, but also the adults that come in now in their 20s or 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, who are now finally ready. As you said, maybe they weren't ready then, but they might be ready now, right? And that goes for them as well, to be mindful that they have created this entire life built on how to cope with what they've experienced with nothing.
Right.
You know,
I mean, I usually start off, and this is the truth, you are brave. Like, the kids who have disclosed that, we spend a lot of time just, you know, and I go over those stats. Like, do you understand how brave you are for even telling someone? And even for the people who don't disclose, because again, it is hard. It is not, no one is blaming you for not telling anything. You are brave for holding that for so many, for, you know, so many years or however long. Some adults never say anything. And it's just, even that I don't know how. That is so hard. That's so hard. So anyone who has been through trauma or holding that trauma or ready to go to therapy, it's just, brave is the only word I can think of. It's, you
absolutely know. There is a sense of strength that no one who has never been through trauma will never understand.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I think it's just something that you have to admire in them being survivors, basically, of their traumatic experiences or them circumstances, right? And it just makes me think about the fact of all of this is going on in the world, right? Seen or unseen, right? Disclosed or undisclosed, right? But in your opinion, how can we do better?
Oh man. On which level, Janae? I mean, no, I'm joking.
I mean, however, if it speaks to a parent, if it speaks to a therapist, or whomever, right? How can we do better?
Better, I'm thinking like system-wide, we need better services. We need better coordination of services, right? So the education system has got to start thinking and talking about trauma. The legal system absolutely has got to start, or, you know, make better ways in thinking about trauma. Anybody, but physical health, the doctors, hospitals, you have to incorporate trauma. Anywhere where there is a child or a family that has, you know, either experienced childhood trauma or any type of trauma, you can't ignore it. You know, more people need more education on trauma and children's mental health, period. You know, so I think on a broader scale, it's like it has to be kind of sprinkled everywhere. Like we all need to be talking about trauma. For parents, you know your kids best. Talk to your pediatricians, your doctors, somebody who you may feel like maybe knows a little bit more about trauma than you do, or whoever, but you know your kids, you know their behavior, their emotions. Talk to somebody about what's going on, talk to your kids. Like, these kids have to know that talking about their feelings and talking to an adult that they trust is okay. They have to know that and learn that. And I think something too that I see all the time with childhood trauma and these kids who have experienced trauma, these parents have experienced trauma, or they are currently experiencing trauma, or it's happening at the same time that the kids are experiencing trauma, so it's important that you get help. You got help for yourself so that you can be the best parent to help your child. And that is way easier said than done. I absolutely know that. But your kids are literally depending on you for survival. So you have to take care of yourselves, get your own help, go to the doctor, advocate for your kids. And like you were saying, Janae, in the school. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and something that I've thought about too, especially with like why I do this, but as far as parents go, kids need one person. They need one reliable, caring, protective person who can help them against all these, traumatic events, adversive like experiences. And that parents out there, I'm talking to you, you can be one. Even if they have two parents, a grandma and an aunt, it could be you. They need one person. So it's parents, I think they downplay sometimes their role in their kids' lives, especially when it comes to trauma, because they just think, here's the kid, I'm dropping them off for an hour. Like, no, they need you. They need you. So
a lot of the work is done outside of the therapy room, right? It's what enhances what that child is experiencing, because within that therapy room, that child is reimagining or going through it again, right? And telling their story, or being brave, as you said, and even just communicating with me, a stranger who they're just getting to know, right? So a lot of times you have to be the caregiver or the parent in the adult in the situation, that you manage what happens afterwards. Because so much has come up. We're only here for an hour,
right,
hour and a half max,
right,
once or twice a week. They're
right,
all
the time. And this is why in trauma treatment, as much as we can, and in most therapies, the parents are involved, whether it's sessions every now and then, or literally in the room with that young child, especially for in infant mental health. Because how are we supposed to teach kids how to control their emotions and their behavior if the parent isn't doing it, or if the parent doesn't know how to help them with that at home? So parents play a huge role with this. I mean, teachers too, going back to educators, right? Like,
sorry to lay y'all another responsibility, but they're in your care,
right? And the whole goal of school, besides to learn, educational achievement, kids have to feel safe in order to learn. If this child is constantly in a state of like fight or fright with trauma, how are they going to learn? They have to feel supported. So it's hard to do your job when the child has experienced trauma, So again, like, teachers just learning as much as you can about trauma, asking your administrators for help or PDs about trauma. Being trauma informed. If I can push for every school to be trauma informed, that'd be beautiful, because you just learn the school functions in a way that they know that trauma affects, like a domino effect, the child, the peers, the family, the teachers, the community, the bigger systems, right? Like, so I mean, I think that's how we kind of bridge the gap with this. Everybody has got to be on board. And I'd say other therapists, like, take care of yourself, please. I learned the hard way. Janae knows this. I mean, you can get burned out easily working in trauma.
Especially when you're trying to manage your own trauma, right? I mean, because let's be honest, going through grad school and
Woo.
doctoral program is traumatic in and of itself. So,
Very much so can be. And we have lives too, you know.
yeah,
I mean, we're sometimes living in the communities that the kids are living in with the community violence, or we
yeah,
have parents and families and friends, and we experience loss. So we are people too. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't
absolutely
help
not.
the people you work with if you are not taking care of yourself. Same goes for, you know, with the parents. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think there's work to be done, but I think the more that we are talking about trauma and the more that people are starting to get a little interested in, well, what is trauma? Let me look this up online right quick, or go to
Hmm.
YouTube. Anything helps because it's impacting so many people and it looks like so many other things that it's not. It's
Yeah,
trauma. So
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Which will be a lot of some of the things that we cover, as we kind of leading up to this and kind of extending afterwards about like resources and where people could even start. And I think one good place to start is what Jill did her research on. As she said earlier, she is a Disney lover. If there aren't any, there is Jill. So
Oh,
yeah,
well,
so
thanks to
explain
people.
so
Yes.
explain to them like something that they can do, because I think sometimes parents get overwhelmed with, well, what can I do? What
Yeah.
can I start? Right. And it's
Yeah.
very, it can be very simple at times,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah. So, what Janae was saying about my dissertation, and this relates to educators, parents, professionals. So, yes, I am obsessed with Disney. We are Disney people. I had the idea to basically take these evidence-based treatments and adapt them or have a tool useful for kids to understand.
yeah.
Sometimes we have to be very creative in that therapy room because kids may not understand what's happening, or they may be too young to, or just what you're saying, they're not catching on to. So
Yeah.
what I did was I spent a lot of time watching Disney movies and I picked out different clips that showed different scenarios of kind of what we do in therapy or what we're teaching in therapy. So for example, there may be a clip, the movie Inside Out could have been my entire dissertation, right?
One of
It
my
shows a lot
favorites.
of emotions. Yes. Oh, my gosh. And yeah, don't even get me started because we will be here all night. But it shows a lot of emotions and behavior and what a child kind of goes through, and kids get it. They're watching cartoons, they're watching these movies. So a part of my dissertation was basically seeing how other mental health professionals, how they rated these clips that was a part of the different therapies or the modules of the therapies. So how good does this clip show intrusive thoughts, or how good does this clip show anxiety and how to relax and do deep breathing.
Mhm.
And it really does. And so I was saying, like, parents, educators, you can use this. You can go onto YouTube or play a Disney movie and say, hey, look, you saw how that person they were upset about something and then they took a deep breath. That's what you can do to help calm down your body. Let's watch. Kids, it's going to click for them. They're going to have that aha moment because you're in their world. You're
Yeah.
talking their language. So I always give parents, even educators, I've worked with them before with like worksheets with Inside Out with the different feelings on them, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, resources for little kids. They have Sesame Streets and Communities, which is they're doing an amazing job with little videos about different adverse situations, pretty much, our experiences. So
Hmm.
using things that children understand developmentally.
Yeah.
For little ones, if they're going to understand when they see Elmo. I think there was one where someone died on Sesame Street, and this person was going through a lot of, I think it might have been Big Bird, I'm not sure, but a lot of different emotions and different behaviors. And they explain it in a way that's developmentally appropriate and kids understand. And that could be a tool to teach kids what to do, how to get through it. So yes, I am all about using, especially Disney movies, um, but anything that will developmentally get that child to have that aha moment to click, I'm going for it.
And if you guys want to find things, I mean, a lot of times it's as simple as Google. I mean, you can put in like movie clips plus anxiety in children,
Oh yeah.
or whatever, right? Like you can put in Sesame Street, like often, I mean, one of their big breakthroughs was talking about developmentally disabled children, right? And highlighting autism and how that might look for other kids and how your child can respond to that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's oftentimes just a quick Google, but
But yeah.
definitely going to have some of those things listed for you guys to kind of be able to click on and go to in order to be a support for your kids.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like teachers, doctors, therapists, we can't do it all, right? And we need your help.
Yeah, we do.
We
We
need
do.
your help. And this is one way that you can start small, right?
Mhm.
And make a
Oh yeah.
big impact.
And
Yeah.
like books too. I mean, I have a
Yeah.
whole bookshelf
Books. Love books.
books for kids. And that's also something that you can do to help with that attachment, that bonding where you're reading it with them and explaining it to them. This character and like the Bernstein Bears, for example, a lot of things happen in those books, but look, he was mad and he did this to calm his body down, or
Yeah.
she wasn't nice to her friend. I mean, these children's books are, and you can get them on Amazon. Some of them are really cheap, some of them are online. So yeah, definitely
Yeah.
getting creative to use the resources to help your kids out.
Definitely. Well, as we come to an end, which I'm sure Dr. Jill will be back, you guys, because like I
So,
said, we have come up with so many different segments and topics that we could talk about regarding children and trauma and education and parenting and therapy and whatever else. But as we end today, I always ask my guests, what's your why?
my why, man. I think I've talked a little bit about it here and there, but like I said, this is hard work. I
Mhm.
do this for the kids, for their families who need and deserve healing, and they can't either do it on their own or they need help to get there.
Mhm.
Again, no child deserves to go through this. They didn't do anything wrong. Trauma is something that happened to them,
Mhm.
and I'm just really passionate about little kids. I'm passionate about trauma. They need that healing, and any way I can help is important to me. I think people start to heal as soon as they feel heard, so
Mm.
as soon as they feel heard. So even if it's me sitting in a room just listening, if that does something or that starts someone's journey to healing, then I'm good with myself, Um, yeah, and helping kids learn how to cope with things that have happened to them. And it all goes back to kind of, not to be corny or anything, like it all goes back to what I was saying when I was in high school. But
Yeah.
we look at adults and how they struggle in adulthood. And it's just like, if we can press rewind and if somebody could have gone in and helped that child in this moment, then maybe their life wouldn't have looked this way,
Mhm.
the children are the future. Again, corny statement, but it's true. So yeah, I just really think that resolving trauma, helping people heal through trauma can change a child's life course. And that's my why.
I love it. I love, love, love it.
Yeah.
And I love that you were here today to kind of talk
Oh,
about
thank you.
childhood trauma and highlight some of these very important aspects that I think more people need to hear,
Mhm.
people need to understand,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And understand the importance and the implications that childhood trauma and unresolved childhood trauma can
Yes.
have on one's life's functioning, whether that be in how we engage with other people, how we engage with ourselves, right? And then how we engage within our bubble, basically,
Mhm.
So thank you, thank you, thank you for
Thank you for
coming
having
on
me.
today. I appreciate you, and we will see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks.